You can imagine a whole range of alternate personalities for yourself. You can inhabit the characters rather than seeing them as another person. I mean, ideally, all of the characters in your story are yourself. We are told that all of the characters in our dreams are us, and that is obviously true. And the same goes for our stories. You are going to be inhabiting these characters, and you want to do it with conviction because you are trying to convince your readers that these are real people. So let them be real people. This is if you're creating characters. Of course, sometimes you might be writing about a genuine historical individual. That is a slightly different process. It will still need all of that empathy and understanding, but you will be accomplishing most of it through research, which is probably as good a place as any to mention the importance of research and the importance of coming to love it. Don't think of it as homework. Don't think of it as you surrounded by piles of dusty books, although in my experience that is pretty much what will happen. But the thing is, if you can learn to enjoy your research, learn to love expanding your information about something, then that will reap incredible benefits. At some point during your writing career, you will probably be called upon to create characters that are not only beyond your experience as a human being, but potentially beyond anybody's experience as a human being. There are, for example, at the shallow end, you've got insane or psychopathic characters that you might need to write. But there's also supernatural characters, animals, alien life forms, all sorts of extraordinary imaginary beings, or even in my own case, severed heads on spikes. I remember that in my novel Voice of the Fire, I had a chapter about one of the gunpowder plotters who all came from Northampton, or at least that was where the gunpowder plot was actually plotted. I had one of them, Francis Tresham, who had been the one who had informed upon the other gunpowder plotters, and for providing these services to the authorities, he was allowed to die of a horrible disease in the Tower of London and wasn't actually burnt to death like his fellows, such as Guy Fawkes and the others. But Francis Tresham's head was put on a spike at the end of Sheep Street in Northampton so that we could all go and look at it. I wasn't around personally at that time. And in my novel Voice of the Fire, I thought it might be quite interesting to have a whole story told from the point of view of a decomposing head on a spike. So you have to think, what would that experience be like? Now, of course, that experience doesn't exist. Severed heads on spikes are not actually conscious, or at least I really, really hope they're not. But in my story, I was thinking, okay, I'm a severed head on a spike. Probably my brains have long since disintegrated. There'll just be a few clinging relics around the inside of my skull. What if one of them were to start itching? What would I do? Perhaps I would contrive to rock my skull back and forward slightly upon the spike so that the spike could scratch and relieve the itch. What sort of things would I be thinking if I were a severed head on a spike? I wouldn't be able to actually see anything, would I? Because the birds would have had my eyes. So I would be able to hear things, though. I mean, actually, this is all nonsense. They would have had my ears as well. But for the purposes of my story, I was sort of thinking, yeah, you've got a very limited position for looking at things, but if you can make it seem realistic, if you can imagine yourself into that space, then you will make it a real and unrepeatable experience for your readers as well. So, yeah, that's one form of extreme character. In general, when you are dealing with characters, it is advisable to Always listen to your characters, to allow them their integrity, to allow them to have their way in terms of the narrative. If there's something that that character seems to really want to do, then probably let them do it. Yeah, always listen to your characters, always allow them their complete integrity, and basically, no matter how horribly the narrative will call for you to treat them, then allow them that integrity. Treat them as if they are your friends, albeit friends that regrettably you sometimes have to kill. As I've just said, if you're writing a terrifying serial murder, do try to get inside the personality so that you create them as a rounded individual. I remember when I was writing V for Vendetta back in 1980, 1981, when we were just putting the series together, and I was thinking about how I was going to portray the fascist secret state, the fascist government that was controlling Britain in the impossibly far future date of my story, which was 1997, because I was writing it in 1981, and I thought, well, 1997 is obviously never going to happen. But having these Nazi figures, given that I am a third-generation anti-fascist, and I absolutely abhor Nazis, what I didn't want to do was to reduce all of my villains to two-dimensional Nazi cartoons where they'd all got a monocle and a University of Heidelberg dueling scar. No. I had to remember that the Nazis didn't arrive from space. They were perfectly ordinary bakers and street cleaners and cobblers and school teachers who happened to have a very bad national experience happen to them, and they became Nazis. So I thought, if this was happening in England, it would be ordinary people. So give each of the Nazis a different reason for what they're doing. Some of them are perhaps good people who are trying to do their best in a horrible regime. Some of them are going along with it because they're frightened. Some of them are going along with it because they actively enjoy it, the feeling of power. But it's important to understand what is inside them, to empathise with them, perhaps especially the villains. Because if you're not careful, those are the things that can end up as completely predictable two-dimensional travesties. And if your heroes are to have any weight and resonance, then you better make sure that your villains have the same weight and resonance. The importance of making your characters three-dimensional can't really be overstated. As an example from comics, a one-dimensional character is where it's either a hero or a villain. It's a goodie or a baddie. You don't need to know anything about them other than that. They don't have to have motivations. They're just a good guy or a bad guy. All of the bad guy's schemes, they can be explained by the fact that he's a bad guy. This is one-dimensional characterisation. Sometime around the probably early 60s, Stan Lee came up with a kind of formula whereby he would give a personality problem to his good guys and his bad guys. So now they were a good guy, but they had trouble finding a girlfriend. Or they were a good guy, but they had a bad leg, which apparently a bad leg is considered a character trait in that kind of comic book. So this is a two-dimensional character. There's really nothing to them. They don't resemble human beings. They just have one slight cosmetic flaw to make them seem more realistic. If you want a three-dimensional character, then you have to take that much, much further. You have to have a character where you know them from the inside out, where you know why they do things. You know all of the elements in their life that have made them the character that they are, so that they have complete agency, so that they have their own agendas. Because actually, in real life, the way that characters work, this reminds me of when I was working on my film, The Show, with Mitch Jenkins, which had an incredible amount of characters who we had given narratives to all of them, so that we decided to have no secondary characters. We decided to have all of the characters had got their story arcs, they'd got their personalities, and we directed the many fine actors that we'd got working on the show. We told them, play this as if the whole film is about you. The reason for that was because that's how it works in real life. We all think that the whole film is about us. We are the centre of the narrative. And in fact, the interaction of characters is generally just that. It's a bunch of people interacting while all believing that the narrative, the story, is entirely about them. That is how three-dimensional characters behave. And you won't get that degree of realism and involvement unless you are actually allowing your characters that, allowing them all the complexity in an ordinary human being.